Well, welcome so much, everybody. We've got 20 more chairs in, so there's plenty of room for everyone. And again, let me just say thank you so much for everybody in attendance today. My name is Lynn Vartan, the director of APEX events, formerly known as Convocations. And this is a very exciting week because this is homecoming week. Yeah! Woo! In addition to all of the great activities and the wonderful traditions this week, we've started a new tradition by having an alumni speaker or an alumni spotlight. And this is the first time we're doing this with Convocations and APEX events, and I just think it's a perfect match, a perfect fit. So that's very, very exciting. So we wanted to partner with Homecoming and with alumni. So we have this event, and our outstanding alumnus for 2017 is our speaker today, and it's Richard Miller. Richard Miller earned both his bachelor's and master's in accounting from SUU. As many of you know who have read the bio, National Security Fellow at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard as part of the U.S. Army War College in 2008. He retired from active duty as a colonel of the National Guard in 2016 with 30 years plus of distinguished and highly active military experience, including deployment as the commander of Cedar City's 2nd Battalion and 222nd Field Artillery in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2005 and 2006. Please welcome Richard Miller.
Thanks, Lynn. Stuart, good to see you. I know most of you are here because you have to be here. You're in class, you're an ROTC cadet, and Reinhardt said, hey, show up because he needs somebody to be in the audience. So thank you for being here. It's hard for me to kind of stand behind the podium and just speak. I sometimes tend to wander a little bit, so if I feel uncomfortable here, you'll know why. But it's good to see you, Professor. I'm glad to be here at SUU. I spent 4 years teaching ROTC back in 1999 to 2003. And we started the program back then. It had been here previously back in Desert Storm, but then it came forward, it didn't come forward with the deactivation of several ROTC programs. But we started again in 1999 with President Bennion. And I love Cedar City. I love the program. I love the ROTC. I love being on campus. It's great to see a lot of friends who I haven't seen in a long time. But also, I admire a couple of individuals that bring a lot of tenderness to my heart for the service and sacrifice they've given our country and our community. I don't know if Dean Templin made it out today or not, but one of my heroes. Dr. Templin was the person that I reported to in the ROTC program in the business department, but an amazing person that did so much for our university and so much for our community, so I miss him. As you notice on the screen and you've seen around campus, the theme of my discussion here today is facing difficulties, lesson learned in a combat zone or a war zone. And I'm going to tell you that everything I learned in a war zone there's nothing new about it, but just in a different context. And how I felt those lessons were more vibrant in that experience, and how it made it more realistic to what I was experiencing as a soldier and as a leader. Of course, the battlefield isn't the only place where I learned all these lessons. I've learned them throughout my life, and I continue to learn them. But the battlefield brought those lessons into a very acute awareness. And it allowed me to have those experiences with great understanding. I was away from home for a very long time in a geographical location that was very difficult. A lot of extreme heat, very dry and dusty, and all the other challenges that go with that. And one of our experiences that we had, and soldiers continue to have, is we got a chance to use porta potties. And those porta potties at times were worse than other times. I didn't say better, I said they were worse. And so especially in the summer times, we did experience that on a daily basis, obviously, but it was a very, very difficult problem to be with, but we did what we did, and we went through that process. Probably one of the best insights and experiences I have to talk about is me relating my experiences to Ramadi, specifically to Ramadi. And to help you understand better what I went through and what my soldiers went through. It was just over a year that I left the assignment in ROTC back in 2003. And the commanding general called me into his office and he said, hey, I'm going to make you the commander of the 222nd Field Artillery, or the Triple Deuce. And we had about 4 months before we packed up and left for training, 6 months in Mississippi and in California. We culminated our training in the National Training Center for 30 days. And we had some great training from great soldiers, both active duty and reserve component, that allowed us to hone our skills, and practice those things would help us become better soldiers and leaders. The nearly 500 soldiers from the Triple Deuce came from communities in Cedar City, St. George, Beaver, Panguitch, all throughout southern Utah. And those 500 soldiers, that you may know here on campus, that you've seen in the community, did some amazing things, and I want to talk about some of those things today. I was surrounded by these soldiers and these leaders, and I couldn't have done what I did without the help of a staff and without the soldiers that came to help and assist in that mission. And I can't think of a soldier that didn't contribute in some form or fashion to the success that we had as a unit. In order to carry out our mission, we needed additional troops. We didn't have a fire support element. And so the Army said, well, you need a fire support element to go down range and to do the missions you're going to do. And so we were given about 170, 180 soldiers from 16 other states that made up our fire support element. And those soldiers were amazing too. Those soldiers came to us well trained, they came to us with the right attitude, and they assimilated into our operation without too much issue. So that brought our task force, which it's called now a task force rather than the Triple Deuce, but a task force that brought us our head count out to about 660 soldiers. Our task force specific jobs were to support the brigade, the 2nd 28th Brigade out of Pennsylvania. In that task force, we had 3 primary missions. The first mission being delivering artillery fires in support of the infantry and the maneuver. And then our second mission was FOB defense, or forward operating defense, forward operating base defense. And so we had soldiers that were in towers 24/7 for an entire year. And I didn't hear a lot of complaints because the sergeants did a great job of taking care of them. And these soldiers were dedicated and performed professionally. But those 4 soldiers, those soldiers that guarded our FOB, did this day in and day out in 110-degree heat with all their what they called the battle rattle on of 60 to 70 pounds worth of equipment, with weapons, paying attention to what was outside the FOB. And our third mission was doing combat operations in various outposts and along within the different communities of Ramadi. And our job was difficult at times, but I can't tell you enough about the effort that was made by the soldiers, a lot that you see here in the room today or with me, and the things that they were accomplished and the things that they helped do with the Iraqi people. Let me describe Ramadi for you for just a minute. On the left was a nicer area of Ramadi, and on the right, on my right, your right, was what we saw mostly of in Ramadi. If you remember back in the time of the combat operations, when Baghdad fell, all the insurgency kind of went west and went into Fallujah, and we fought in Fallujah for a while, and then those in Fallujah went west again, and they went into Ramadi and settled in Ramadi, and that's really where the insurgency started, and began to fight against the U.S. and the coalition forces. And so we went west with that, and the U.S. established a large base in Ramadi. And so you see this community. Roughly 400,000 people lived in this community, and the majority of the buildings were pockmarked with battle-damaged weapons and for interactions with the insurgency. And so this community was going through some very difficult challenges. Think about the dynamics of what happened in Iraq. And so when we came in, we made some mistakes, I believe, as the U.S., and we disbanded the Army. By disbanding the Army, you took a very large Army force and said, okay, you're now unemployed. What are you going to do to make money, to feed your families, to take care of your needs? And those folks, a lot of them did things that they could make some money, but the majority were faced with, how do I take care of my family? And those that did that ended up going toward the insurgency, toward Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda would pay them a month's wage for an activity that may have taken them a week or 2 weeks to earn in doing just a 1 hour or 2 hour event. And so you could see how it was very tempting as a former Iraqi military, to go do something in support of their families, and you couldn't blame them for that. There was not a lot of greenery, not a lot of palm trees. We were on the Euphrates, but the majority of the community was very desolate, and it was very hot. Al-Qaeda at the time knew that they needed to establish a foothold in Ramadi, and they felt like that was going to be where they would then fight the U.S. and the coalition forces. And so the battle there became very fierce back in the end of 2000, or the beginning of 2004, up through about 2007 and 2008. But it was challenging at times. I would say a lot of times, but and again, I'm going to walk through some of the scenarios I'm going to tell you about and some of the challenges we had. The FOB that we lived on was about 2 square miles, roughly, and if you think of a prison, in my opinion, the good guys were on the inside of this prison, the bad guys were on the outside. And we were stuck there trying to survive. We had normal facilities. We had a dining facility where we could eat. We had a chapel that we could attend services in. We had a gym. We had a route that we had run around on the outside inside of the perimeter. I never did do that. It didn't make sense to me to be running around. Some of my captains, like Jeremy Williams and others, would run around that track, and I'm thinking to myself, there's a lot of snipers along that, but they didn't, and we had a lot of rockets and mortars. But I didn't ever do that. I stuck my head in the gym once in a while. But all of those facilities provided the means for us as a unit, and roughly a footprint of about 4,000 people to live day in and day out. And I'm going to show you a couple more photos here, but this is, I think this is the barracks for a, looking at that's Charlie Battery, or Bravo, I think, Jeremy, yeah. So that's a typical building you would see in Ramadi on this base. And these were old Iraqi army facilities that we had taken over and established our FOB. I'm going to talk with you about kind of 3 things that I learned as a leader and also as a soldier. So I'd been in this place I just described, less than a week when my pivotal wartime experience happened. It really wasn't anything out of the ordinary for war, that is, but it certainly gave me a new perspective. Before I share that experience, though, let me first clarify that I'm well versed in the various strategies of avoiding difficulties. And I, like you, as a student, and I avoided taking tests or studying for tests. I avoided doing my homework altogether. I skipped a couple of tests. I never skipped Tim Lewis's tests because they were very difficult. And in fact, my good friend Sidney Nackins here, and my best friend, Robert Nackin, he and I were taking Tim's class, and Tim was very difficult. And Robert, who now is an orthopedic surgeon, it'll make sense in a minute why the story goes this way. But we were taking a class together, and Robert came into class, and I've been studying for a couple of days for this test. And I'm telling this story because I appreciate and love Tim a lot. So I'm taking this class, and I'm studying and doing okay in the class. Robert shows up, walks into the classroom, and he says, "Hey, what's going on?" And I say, "Hey, we got a test today." And Robert said, "What are you talking about?" And I said, "Yeah, we have a test in about 10 minutes, dude." And so Robert began to sit down. I thought, oh, that poor guy's going to do terribly on Tim Lewis's test. And so after the test, we got the test back. I looked over at Robert. He had a 94, and I think I had like an 82. And anyway, one guy's a doctor, one guy's an Army guy. So that kind of was my history in avoiding things and not doing the things I needed to do, but kind of procrastinating. And so as I talk about how we procrastinate as individuals, I want to explain in context of the military environment. So I learned that as we take tests and as we have relationship challenges, and as we have things that we need to do, if we don't face them, they're not going to go away. They're going to become more difficult in the end. They're going to be more challenging for us. They're going to add stresses to us, and it's going to be more difficult as a person to get through those things. And so I want to talk about how important it is that, that we not avoid what's in front of us, that we not shirk our responsibilities, but we take action and we lead forward with what we need to do. Here's another picture set of our FOB. We had 2 howitzers that were doing our mission. They're in Camp Ramadi. Then we had another 2 howitzers about 35, 40 miles to the south of us at a place called Havanea. And so we really had 2 FOBs that we were taking care of. There are the porta potties that we would skip from pallet to pallet to get into, and that was a wonderful time. I'm not going to spend any more time on that one. And so as we try to figure out what's best for us, the first lesson I want to talk about is, like I said, is facing it, coming to a resolution that you need to face what's in front of you, whether it's schoolwork, whether it's a relationship, whether it's employment, or the things that you need to do. I was new to the battlefield, and in my first week there, thank you. In my first week there, I got my first exposure to the battlefield. And I was asked by my brigade commander to go with him on a trip to one of my sister battalions, which was Colonel Smith, Eric Smith. He was the battalion commander for the 3-7 Marines. And they were fairly adjacent to where we were, but closer into what we called Route Michigan, or into the community of Ramadi. And Colonel Smith asked that, hey, let's go on a foot patrol into the area of operations. I've been there a week. And the first thing I realized, I didn't have my personal security detail. I had a handful of soldiers that accompanied me as a battalion commander to go out into the community and to help provide overwatch for me as I did my mission. And so I didn't have them. You know, Colonel Gronsky said, hey, let's go. And I jumped in his Humvee with his PSD, and we took off. And we arrived at Colonel Smith's location. He said, hey, Rich and Colonel Gronsky, let's go on a foot patrol. Well, let me tell you, I was very uptight about this. I was very nervous about this. I was well trained because I spent the last 6 months or the last 20 years in the Army getting trained, but this was my first exposure on the ground. And as we took off, we began to walk into the community in the residential areas. We were fully dressed. We had 60 to 70 pounds worth of equipment on. I had our weapons with us, and we're doing a foot patrol. And there's probably 5 or 6 Marines with us, with the 2 lieutenant colonels and the colonel. And as we started off, we heard sniper fire. Not a lot of rounds, maybe 2 or 3 rounds go off. But when you hear that for the first time, it's such a overwhelming experience. And I knew for a minute, I'm like, what am I doing? You know, I'm not prepared. Well, I am prepared, but I don't have the experience to go do this mission. And so I didn't know what yet to do and how to respond to that. But I kept going because Colonel Smith, who had been there for a while, he wasn't a newbie, pushed forward into the area, and I wasn't going to be left behind kind of waiting. So we all pushed forward, and we started to go towards what we thought were the sounds, or where the sniper fire was coming from. And it was pretty intense. So we didn't know where they had come from, but we could see a building, about a 3-story building that was not completely developed, down 100, 200 meters away. So we started toward that. Not too far into where we were, we stopped, and Colonel Smith said, hey, we're going to break into 3 groups here, and we're going to come into 3 separate alleys and see if we can't kind of corral this person or persons that we may be thinking shooting at us. And so as we're going along, I'm looking into the community, and there's residential homes there with dilapidated courtyards, and stray dogs running around, and young people in the area running around talking, and they knew we were there for a reason, so it kind of put them to where they went back inside their homes. But we began to run towards these areas, and Colonel Smith said, hey, take this Marine and you guys go down this alleyway. And so he and I started to run down this alleyway, and the road beneath my boots was a mixture of dirt and then also kind of broken up concrete and broken up asphalt, and there were scrubby brushes along the way, and I felt that the time was slowing down for me. We weren't slowing down, but we were running, but I was slowing down, and I was thinking to myself, what's going on? I became really scared. I mean, just really scared to the point that I kind of felt like that I had slowed down to a point I'd stopped, but I wasn't. We were still running around at full speed. Then the time came, and I stood there, and and I said, what am I doing? Why am I here? Why am I here? What am I doing? Is it better for me just to stop right here and wait and maybe keep myself somewhat secure between these two buildings? Or do I keep pushing forward to help support this mission? Well, my mind took over, my thought took over, and I said, what, I need to push forward because people are waiting for me and they're relying upon me, and I had a high-speed Marine behind me that was pushing me forward. And so we went on and we chose to run on. The choice I had to avoid or to face the difficulty is kind of how you are faced with difficulties in life. You're in school, you're in your profession, you're in your education, maybe in a master's degree, and you got to push on. You got to push through some of those difficulties that you may be seeing. So of course, not advocating to seek out danger, and I don't want you to seek out danger in order to have this experience, but I want you to understand that you're going to find these difficulties in your life, and it may be as simple as a relationship with a friend, or it may be in school, or it may be someone in your family that's experiencing cancer or death. But you have to push through these difficulties. You have to face those challenges that are ahead of you. So let me continue on with this, and I'll show you this slide you see here. I was not in this particular operation, but Sergeant Major Brown, Rick Brown, is he still on campus as security? I think Rick was in this mission, but we had a lot of our operations were going out and finding IEDs along these routes, and once we found an IED, we had to clear that IED, and so they'd put up some smoke grenades to obscure the convoy and the operations they were conducting. So we continued to head out with Colonel Smith, and we got to a point where we felt like that we kind of corralled this area, and as we finished that mission, we didn't find anybody with weapons, but we did find one of the guys, one of the Iraqi men, was on top of that third story with a video camera, and we pulled the video, and he'd been filming the vehicles and the convoys leaving the community, leaving the FOB, and kind of getting some intelligence. And so we then took him and gave him to his leaders, the sheikhs and imams, and then we could continue on with our mission that day. But in short, we didn't ever have any other physical harm toward us. But that experience, I tell you, was one of the most difficult challenges I had initially, was facing the possibility of being in that environment. The second lesson I have for you is going to sound a little weird, but it's called give up. And so I give you this lesson because it's unlikely admonition for battlefield. It's not something I would share with you to say give up when you face something difficult. But what I'm talking about is giving up trying to control something that you can't control. So giving up on that challenge in your life that you have no way of controlling it. Either it's something in school, it's in a relationship, it's at work, but giving up on the thought that you have to control everything you're doing. And so it's not news to any of you, and many of you in this room are in that circumstance right now where you feel like you're losing control, whether it's in your profession or whether it's in your life or a relationship that you may be having. But I tell you, give up on the thought of controlling it, and doing what you can do and doing the best you can do in that process. We tend to try to control things anyway. As a military officer, my wife will attest to the fact that I'm always trying to control things. I'm always trying to be in charge of the environment, always trying to be in charge of what we do as a family. But I learned early on, probably after our second teenager, that I had no control. and after 6 kids, I realized I don't have control of teenagers. I don't think anybody does. And if you're a teenager, I'm sorry I offended you today. But that, as a parent, you begin to realize you don't have control of them. So what do you do? How do you respond to that? Give up on of thinking you have control, and focus on what you can do to influence them and help them through that process. And in anything you do, whether, like I said, it's at school, relationship, or even during the combat operations. So we gave up on the things we couldn't control. The story I would relate to that is twice a week, time-wise, you're going to, as Lynn or somebody's going to tell me when I'm time-wise, but twice a week we would go to the government center and we would work with the government officials, the sheikhs and imams. The sheikhs were the business leaders and the imams were the religious leaders. And twice a week, Ramadi being the province capital for that province, we would work with those folks to try to help them to regain stability, to regain normalcy, and help them have success within their community. Now remember, Ramadi is predominantly Sunni, and so the majority of that community, there was no police force at the time. The army had been disbanded, so you have a 400,000 person community without a police force, without any somewhat structure, and you can see why it was so difficult at times to be there. But as we met with them, we started that process in June or July of 2005, and we started that process and went about 5 or 6 months with very little success and very little wins, and it got really frustrating to me, and I couldn't understand, me being an individual from a first world country that had processes and systems and agencies and organization that controlled things and allowed us as U.S. citizens to have a lot of normalcy in our process, to be in a third world country, to work with these gentlemen and not have success at getting things accomplished which I think we needed to accomplish. And at first I wanted to control that environment. I wanted to be able to say, hey, come on guys, let's just get this together, let's go out and make this happen. But I failed to understand the other challenges that they were facing. Al-Qaeda was very strong in Ramadi. And Al-Qaeda, we would leave the government center, which you see a picture here. We'd leave the government center and we'd go back to our fob in a fairly safe, secured environment. And Al-Qaeda would then do their business in the afternoon and the evenings. And they would show up to these government leaders, and they'd show up to those business leaders, and they'd show up to the imams. And they would threaten them, just like the mafia would threaten any organization it wanted to impose their will on. And they would threaten them with violence and sabotage, and to the point they were killing a lot of these folks if they didn't bend to their will and their way. So I got frustrated, not really paying attention to that we were not making the progress and the things that we needed to do. And so it wasn't until later on, as I got more experience, that I began to realize I just need to give up on that control. Take those simple wins, take those things that we're doing, have success with them, and eventually those things will begin to come together and we'll have larger successes in the future. And so we started towards the national elections in the end of 2006. And in some of those meetings, we would have 10 to 12 different business and government leaders. And then toward the end of 2006, when the national elections were coming into Iraq and into that community, we started to have a lot of significance there in Ramadi, because the U.S. ambassador came out to Ramadi, the prime minister came to Ramadi, because they wanted the Ramadi and the Sunnis to get involved in the electoral process. And so they were visiting our facilities, which then kind of ramped up the energy of Al-Qaeda and ramped up the kind of the death and destruction that we began to experience. But the challenges we faced got better. And I would tell you the same. You're probably starting off with small wins within a relationship, within school, within your profession, but the big wins will come. You just have to stay with it and stay determined to succeed. But not worry so much about the control. Give that piece up. And so that's kind of the second facts that I want to talk with you about. So here's a picture of kind of our typical day. My boss, Colonel Gronsky, is there kind of in the middle sitting down. He's talking to those sheikhs, and he's trying to influence them. The gentleman standing is the interpreter. And it was always interesting. I had a great interpreter named David I'll talk about later. But the interpreter had to take what was being said in a very emotional manner from the colonel, and then translate that into Iraq, into Arabic, and use some of the same tones. And at times I would see my boss get really frustrated because the interpreter would stand there kind of stoic, and my boss was very livid and excited and saying all this stuff, and then the interpreter would say, yeah, he'd say, yeah, the colonel wants you guys to do better at getting things together. And so my boss was thinking, no, you need to be shouting at these guys and yelling at them. And it just didn't work that way. But you can see these gentlemen, they're kind of casual thinking, okay, here's another U.S. commander on the ground telling me, promising me all these things. But the minute he leaves, there's going to be another U.S. commander. But the minute he leaves today, I'm going to be faced with this Al-Qaeda. I'm going to be faced with all these challenges and all these possible dangerous situations within his family and his community. So, I guess the message to wrap up this particular piece would be, understand what you have control of and what you don't, and don't worry so much about what you don't have control. The next one I want to talk about is David. David was my interpreter, and David was an amazing young man. He left his home. He grew up in Baghdad with his parents and 5 siblings. And when he hit about age 20, 21, his whole childhood was changed because Al-Qaeda changed that. Al-Qaeda came into Iraq, and they began to use Iraq as the hotbed for training and to launch their violence throughout the world. But David, along with others, didn't want that to happen to his country. So David told his family, hey, I'm going to school in Jordan. I'm going to go to university in Jordan, and I'll be gone to school, and I'll come home on breaks from school. But what David did, he took his 2 brothers with him, and the 3 of them showed up in Ramadi at the gate back in 2004 and said, hey, does the U.S. need any interpreters? So here's a kid, 20 years old, brings his 2 brothers along. The 3 of them were interpreters for the U.S. forces. Now, David spends about 8 years from 2004 to 2011 helping the U.S. and helping his country with the things that he knew that he could then help in the process. David knew he couldn't control Al-Qaeda, and David knew he couldn't control what was happening to his country in the sense that he could control on the macro level, but he felt like he could do something to help out his community, to help out his country. And David got involved. After we left Ramadi, David was still there interpreting for the follow-on unit. And David would go at night back to Baghdad and see his family, and he would tell them, hey, university's going great. And he wore disguises when he left the FOB. He'd get back into Baghdad. But one time when he told me, and David's still alive, by the way, but David told me as he was going back one time, he was followed by Al-Qaeda. And they followed him to his home. He didn't know it at the time, but they found his father and his mother. And we come to find out, talking to David, that David's father was also helping with combating the insurgency. And Al-Qaeda captured his father and mother and tortured and killed his father in front of his wife and daughters, while David and his 2 brothers were out in Ramadi being interpreters. And so you would think, hey, David should have run away from the situation that he was in. He should have avoided doing what he was doing for that country, but he didn't. He stayed there. He focused himself. He knew he could control everything, but he stayed there to do what he could do and to participate in helping Iraq become a free nation and helping Iraq, have democracy that they could then enjoy the freedoms that we enjoy here in the U.S. So David got involved. So let me see if I got... So the third lesson I got for you, I've only got 3 lessons, so we'll get out of here in a decent amount of time. But the third lesson I got for you is provide Overwatch. This gentleman, I think, is also still a police officer on campus. Is that correct, Jed Townsend? Is Jed here by chance, Ron? No, he's out. He's out giving tickets, probably to me because I parked over here. So anyway, the third lesson I want to talk about is providing Overwatch. So you remember when I was on that foot patrol the first week in Ramadi, and we were shot by the sniper. When I returned to the FOB, now Jed, who's the gentleman to my right here, he was my PSD, Personal Security Detail Lead, and Jed was a specialist. And his job was to look after, like I said, the commander and to take care of him. But that first assignment I had, I didn't take Jed with me. And I went forward with my boss. When I got back and told Jed the story, he was irate. He was so mad at me for having left him. And he said, I have one job and one mission here in Ramadi, and that's to keep you safe. And you almost, you could have got killed. What are you doing? He's yelling at me. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm a lieutenant colonel. You're a specialist. why are you yelling at me right now? So the cadets are kind of laughing because they understand the dynamic, right? But guess what? He wasn't so focused on that. He was focused on taking care of me, looking out for me, and providing Overwatch for me as his leader. And so you see, Jed's job, he took serious. He knew what he had to do, and he wanted to ensure that I was protected, to the point that a lot of times he didn't even care about himself or the safety of his own being. But Jed was an amazing person. And I owe my life 100 times over to Jed and Sergeant Cowan and Sergeant Eves and others and Sergeant Brown and those that I worked with. So I'm going to tell you a story, another story, and this one is about us going to the government center. And a typical event to the government center, like I said, was twice a week. We'd take 4 gun trucks with 4 or 5 soldiers in each of those gun trucks with heavy machine guns and with a lot of firepower. And we would travel down to the government center, do our thing, meeting with the government center, and then we'd leave and we would drive like crazy people all the way back to the FOB. Because from the FOB to the government center and the government center to the FOB, this particular route was called Route Michigan. And there were anywhere from 25 to 30 attacks a month on that one route, which was predominantly IEDs, improvised explosive devices, where the enemy was burying those bombs in the ground. And so, Rick, I just noticed you're here. Good to see you. I'm going to talk about Rick in a minute. So anyway, that's the problem. If I see you in the audience, I'm going to maybe talk about you. Some people are starting to duck away. But and so we were sitting waiting for our convoy to leave, and we heard over the radio, "Hey, you got about 2 minutes, and then we'll give you permission to leave." And there was the operations center which kept the routes. They would color code the routes. The route was black or brown, depending on how dangerous it was. And so we were waiting to leave, and then all of a sudden we heard this deafening explosion about 150 to 200 meters away. We're like, what was that? That was definitely a large IED. and then shortly after that, on the radio it said, "Hey, we just, Bravo 17 just got hit with an IED. One of the Bradley fighting vehicles just got hit." And so we radioed in and said, "Hey, we're right here. Do you want us to go provide support?" And so we took off in our 4 Humvees. They opened the gates and we took off. And then we set up in an Overwatch position to provide security and safety for them as some of our soldiers went and extracted the wounded soldiers out of the Bradley fighting vehicle. As we got there, a Bradley fighting vehicle looks like kind of like a tank. Doesn't have as large a main gun, but it's a very high vehicle, very well armored. But the back end of that Bradley fighting vehicle had been blown off. So most likely the enemy had buried 4 or 5, daisy chained 4 or 5 of these large ammunition bullets together to blow up, and it did. There was not anybody killed, but we had 3 or 4 soldiers that were injured in that Bradley fighting vehicle. And so as we set up this Overwatch position, we were helping protect them. And while we were there, we received small arm fire, across the front of our Humvee. And again, I thought, what's our purpose here right now? Our purpose is providing Overwatch, helping those soldiers get extracted out of that vehicle, get into a safe Humvee, and then we allowed another Bradley to come in and then tow that Bradley fighting vehicle back to the FOB. But as we were doing that, thoughts went through my mind again. What's my position right now? What am I doing right now? I'm providing Overwatch for someone else. I'm helping someone else. And so the third thing, and I would ask you to pay attention to, is how are you helping other people? How are you providing Overwatch for your friends, your family, your neighbors, as soldiers, as you get to be, in a deployment possibly? What do you do to provide Overwatch? And so I want you to think about that as we talk more about the providing Overwatch piece. The point of the Overwatch is to provide a safe premise for those to do what they need to do, and for you as an individual to help keep those that you're supporting safe from any harm or accident. Let me give you another story, but this one is about Overwatch, but it doesn't wrap up so neatly. And I'm going to read this one more because it's better for me to do that than to kind of stand here and talk about it, so it's easier for me to stay focused. We were returning from a mission. We had left the FOB and we'd gone down to visit Habanea, which I said was about 35 or 40 miles to the south. That's where one of our other units was. And so we were down there visiting them. And we were on our way back, and it was in January. And so it's fairly cold in comparison to what we have in Iraq. But much like St. George weather. We're on our way back, and I got a radio now. Came over the radio that, hey, my executive officer, who was back at the FOB in Ramadi, was trying to get a hold of me, and so we stopped. We pulled into OP 2901. Jared, is that right? Pulled into OP 2901, and I got out of my vehicle, went to the operations center there at the OP, and got on the phone. And one of my men had been killed that day while I was away. So I told you the majority of my men were my soldiers were from neighboring communities in southern Utah. But also in those neighboring communities, I had my buddy's son. I had my brother who's here. I had a friend who was an ER nurse that worked on my son. We had neighbors that were there with us, but and I even brought along with me 11 of the ROTC cadets that I commissioned as the ROTC PMS as lieutenants under my command. And my wife can vouch for that. The greatest burden and sense that of concern and responsibility was for these men. And I got that call that one of our guys had been killed. And this gentleman was from another state. He was part of that 160, 170 soldiers that showed up from the other states that we had with the fire support element. His name was Mclaughlin. And Mike, as Mac as we called him, he and I spent a lot of time together. He had been promoted to lieutenant colonel once we got in theater. So the two of us were lieutenant colonels. And Mike was the leader engagement officer for the brigade, the primary one. And Mac and I spent a lot of time together. Watched a lot of movies. We laughed together. We worked on strategy together. We fought bad guys together. We did a lot of operations together. Twice a week we were going to the government center. We cried together. Rhonda had a chance to bring our baby Ivy down when she was 4 months old to Mississippi, and he cooed over her pictures as I showed him. But Mac was now gone. So when I climbed out of my vehicle after hearing the news, I started to deliberately walk into the desert. I needed some space. I needed some time to kind of reflect on what had just happened. And the thing about it is, I had been with Mac and my convoy of soldiers. We had been with Mac the previous 2 days doing recruiting for Iraqi men to become police officers and soldiers. And we started off that recruiting program, and the first day we had about 20, 25 guys show up. And we had gone to the government center earlier asking the sheikhs and imams to help us get more people involved in this process because we needed to secure Ramadi. And it was not going to get done by the U.S. presence only. So the first day, 20, 25 people, we went back down and pleaded again with the sheikhs and imams. And the next day we had about 200 people show up. To the point we now had some challenges. We had to get those folks on the outside of our perimeter, inside through a concertina wire, and inside through the gates, and through a serpentine, and so that we could make sure they weren't carrying any explosives. They didn't have any suicide vests on. And so we started to have that problem. But that first day we had success. We brought them all in. We got them processed. The third day we had about 1,000 people show up. So you've all been to Disneyland. You know what it's like to get in the gates of Disneyland when you first arrive. That's what it looked like. We had 1,000 men, and we had said to them earlier, we're going to be able to process about 250 to 300 a day. And so we said to them, we're going to try to get all of you through here, but it's going to be difficult. Well, I left that day thinking, hey, everything's fine. Mac's got this. He's doing a great job with this. We got a lot of soldiers on this detail. I had very capable leaders in my command. Colonel Gronsky had augmented that operation with a lot of the soldiers of the brigade, and folks were doing amazing work. And I left that day because I needed to go down south to see FOB Havaneh and see my other soldiers. I left that day, told Mac, hey, you got this, you're going to do great. So I'd been with Mac the day before. And when I heard Mac had been killed, I said, why didn't I stay? Why did I leave? Why did I go to Havaneh? Why Why wasn't I there providing Overwatch for Mac? Why wasn't I there helping him survive? And I thought through this, and I continue to think through it on a weekly, daily basis, what I could have done differently as a commander. But you know what? There's nothing tactically that I would have done differently. Mac took the opportunity. He seized the opportunity to provide Overwatch for other soldiers. And I want to talk about what Mac did. So as we had this large group, this large body of Iraqis trying to get into to the gates, they began to push and shove because they had heard that we were only going to process 300 folks. And so they're pushing and shoving. So Mac took the initiative. He took a blowhorn, and he took a couple of soldiers with him, and a couple he took with him a German Shepherd, a bomb sniffing dog, and he left the comforts of the concertina wire and the M16s and all the soldiers, and went outside with his interpreter, and began to tell the people, you got to get in line, you got to get in a formation. We can't process you unless you do what you're told, and you got to get some order of resemblance of order here. Otherwise, we're going to have to shut this whole thing down. And so as he's doing that, because we couldn't take all these people just in a large mass through the gate, we had to have them go through a serpentine in order to check them for bombs and everything else, like I said. So as he was doing this, a suicide bomber knew he was coming out. And with that dog, they knew that he'd be found out. And that suicide bomber blew himself up. And as he did that, the shrapnel from that suicide vest went into about 150, 160 people. 93 Iraqis died that day. Colonel Mack died that day. He got hit just below his helmet with a BB and fell to the ground. And as you know, in addition to him being injured and hit, I mean, it was just complete chaos and very graphic and tragic. And as this was happening, people were running toward the soldiers. Our soldiers were running towards Mac and others. And I had several of our soldiers that got injured, seriously injured. And people went to Colonel Mack to say, hey, where are you hurt, sir? He pushed them off and he said, hey, take care of those guys. They're worse than I am. So despite Mac being injured, he was looking out, he was overwatching for his soldiers. And he pushed them toward them and helping him. Unfortunately for Mac, we couldn't stop the bleeding. The soldiers tried. We took him back to the troop medical clinic, and they couldn't stop the bleeding, and Mac died that day. So I take you back to where I was. So I'm in the outpost, and I heard about Mac's death, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden my PTSD starts coming forward, and my battle buddy Jed Townsend shows up, and he's saying to himself, I got to provide Overwatch. His Overwatch was not in a sense of security, but his Overwatch was in the sense, I got to help protect my boss and help protect my commander. Came up to me, gave me a big hug, and he provided Overwatch for me that day. And that's what I'm asking you to do as an individual, whether you're a soldier, whether you're a student, whether you're a faculty or a business owner or a mom or a dad, is providing Overwatch to those people that you love and care about. Figuring out a way that you can help them in their difficult challenges, helping them, giving them comfort when they're going through some struggles, and understanding and being intuitive to recognize when someone is having challenges in their life. So Jed did that for me. Jed came in and he provided Overwatch for me and allowed me to carry on and do my mission. So when you think that life is challenging for you, and when your life is going hard, and you're in a position where you don't see any way to get out of the challenge that you're having, always know there's those out there that love you and care about you. And they want to provide Overwatch for you. They want to help you. And you need to reach out to them. You need to ask them for that help. We lost another soldier who died from wounds later on when he got back home, Sergeant Dresky. we were fortunate to only lose 2 soldiers out of our task force. And unfortunately, I've lost 5 other soldiers to suicide since we've come home. And so I ask you, pay attention to those out there who you think may be struggling. Pay attention to yourself. Think of ways that you can reach out. Think of ways that you can ask for help. There's no better feeling as a person to know that someone's asking you for help or assistance. So be cognizant of that and think of ways that you can be in an Overwatch position. The last thing I want to do here is read a kind of a description of Mac's death and his life that my wife wrote. I'm just going to read this. So, in the dismal afternoon of January 5th, 2006, Lieutenant Colonel Mike Mclaughlin of Task Force 222 lay dying on the unsympathetic earth outside the Ramadi glass factory. One of the metal pellets that had sprayed from the suicide bomber's vest into the bodies of hundreds had struck him just below the helmet, at the base of his head. Minutes before, he had seen the dangers of a situation and had moved toward it, had stepped up to solve it. And that move, which may not have been the most tactically sound, was certainly the most morally complete. He saved hundreds of lives with that decision. The final moments of his life were just as honorable. As he bled, he refused to help with the men. He refused help until his men were cared for. Mac faced his most difficult challenge. He didn't avoid it. He didn't worry about it, what he couldn't control. And he just did what he could do. He provided the ultimate Overwatch as he sacrificed his life that day for his friends. And thank you for having me today.